do you think does it well? Who plays well with materials?
I think the pioneers are still working extremely well. We mentioned Audemars Piguet for introducing, I think, popularising bimetal in the 70s when they launched the second iteration of the original Royal Oak 1502 as a smaller ladies piece, and very quickly from that moment on introduced bimetal, and then obviously full elite metals into the range. And Audemars Piguet particularly, as we discussed earlier in the case of the offshore, had to continue to work in material. And 2 years ago, I think we saw that beautiful black ceramic with the rose gold screw heads, marking out the iconic bezel with its 8 screws. I mean, they continue to play with material combinations brilliantly. Cartier have always worked extremely well in combination. I think the Art Deco piece that we think of when we think back into the 20s, particularly around the tank, there's executions of the Santos, which are just stunning and have been made in virtually every combination of elite and base metal you could imagine. I think in terms of the newer composites, I think you're talking to brands such as Panerai with Carbotech. Breitling have done a lot of work. They launched their own. An interesting story is how brands really do define themselves by taking ownership of particular alloys and composites. So in the case of Breitling, they launched a composite known as Bright Light recently, which is supreme. It's 8 times stronger than, more scratch resistant than steel, I believe. It's an extraordinary substance and incredibly light. So there is work going on constantly. Ulysse Nardin, we can talk about materials very, very happily. Hublot, of course. I think Hublot is interesting. It brought gold to the market with a rubber strap for the first time, which was, again, a combination of materials. As we move out of cases alone, we can talk about case and strap or bracelet material. And that combination of Hublot's launch project, which was to launch a rubber strap on with a gold case, it was kind of unheard of at that point at the start of the 80s. So, there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of innovation, and a certain amount of evolution that has gone along with the not just the invention and the development of new composites, but also with the fact that the consumer now is likely to own more than one watch. And before, you then had to make a judgment call. What do I need? Okay, I need a stainless steel watch. My life, my job, my career means I need a long-lasting, robust watch. Or, do you know what? I sit at a desk all day. I'm driven to work. Who knows? So a gold watch is fine. Nothing's going to come near me. Nothing's going to go near my gold watch. Now we have the choice. We don't have to make these distinctions. So we can experiment. We said, of course I need a stainless steel watch. I need a full gold watch, but I also want a Carbotech watch. I also want a ceramic watch. There's all these opportunities to explore different materials. And you don't really want a watch case just lined up with exactly the same watches, unless you're monomaniacally collecting steel tool watches or something.
Since the 18th century, watches have been adorned with enamel miniatures and gemstones, so blurring the lines a little bit between jewellery and watches. So a little bit more, potentially they were more female-led, these pieces, and as you referenced evolution, as we've gone through, we've been able to see that change a little, and how watches have a lot more gem set. And it's not necessarily, we'll talk about we won't talk about all the different type of settings. So obviously snow setting, pave, etc. The list is quite extensive, and the artwork behind it is the artistry and the creativity from the brands. But how do you think that has moved from identifying it as a sort of a woman's watch into a much more it's not gender specific?
Yeah. I think what's really interesting about the blend of metals and elite metals, particularly in watches, is that they have, by and large, always remained gender-free. So whether it's a stainless steel and yellow gold or stainless steel and rose gold, they've inevitably often been offered in both sizings for women and for men. Now we really look at watches as being non-gendered, and I think bimetal particularly has led the charge in being probably one of the few luxury products that have remained non-gendered, even when going into what, as you describe it, Faye, jewellery-based executions. But what we've seen much more recently, I think, is the arrival of gem setting into larger pieces, and not just larger pieces that can be worn by men, but into pieces that traditionally wouldn't have been considered to be worthy of gem setting, which is time only, often stainless steel watches. And I think that is an evolution. Patek Philippe, when they launched the 24, they produced a stainless steel watch, but they made sure that they were able to offer it with diamond setting. And I think there's a lot of examples of where gem setting has become another design cue, another iteration, rather than the obligatory rather than becoming simply a way of adding value to a particular timepiece. It's become intrinsic to the design of that timepiece. And we see it in male models now. We see it in models now where the indexes are in diamonds in a very simple execution. I mean, Zenith are doing a wonderful job in Defy at the moment, producing gem setting within watches. And of course we see the execution of rainbow.
Well, that was the example I was going to use. It's not just an explosion. There has been an explosion from indices and stretches to sort of fully gold set, eye-watering models. It wasn't that long ago we would see a steel watch with diamonds. Brands, particularly some of the older manufacturers, just wouldn't do it. It was not part of their ethos. They felt precious gem set should only be reserved for precious metal. And I'm talking sort of a 15 years capacities, like time frame. It's not that long. And now we're seeing, you referenced sort of rainbow. We've got a lot of brands that are playing with those colors. It's not just a traditional elegant timepiece, but they're going they're pushing the boundaries. They're really exploring and having a lot of fun, because they're experimenting with all these options. But you've got to take it seriously as well, because that the setting, sourcing the stones, and that's not going to be, they're not inexpensive watches. There are a variety of watches on the market that have the rainbow effect. They are scarce with every brand that buy that, or they're not produced in large quantities. Probably because they're not to everyone's taste, and whether you want to spend that much money you're going to be wearing in 10 years' time is a slightly different matter. But the fact that the brands are actually experimenting, having fun, just being really playful, I think that's testimony to them. In the same way that they experiment with the materials, it's what else can we do? Because the Defy isn't new, but what they've done is the white model, it was a limited edition that they brought out this year, or Zenith that brought out. That piece isn't new, but their execution of it. And it's not gender specific, to your point a few moments ago. Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right, Faye. I think that we're talking about relatively small changes to watches. I'm talking traditionally now, that would occasion a brand to say, this year we are able to offer you this watch. And the changes were incremental. I mean, with respect, we're offering it in a slightly different size, or maybe another metal, maybe with a different dial execution. But fundamentally, there were guardrails to how watches were being produced and being sold. What's happened in the last 15 to 20 years is those guardrails have come down considerably now, because brands recognize that if you stay too close to the core offer of the watch business, then people aren't going to be excited. They're just generally not going to be enticed into buying a watch. So the opportunity, now, movements take several years to develop. You can't really execute a new movement in record time, particularly if it's going to have a new complication attached to it. So what you can do is you can start to work with materials, and particularly with colorways. And colorways are largely brought into the watch by gem setting. You can obviously change color dials, you can use lacquering, you can enamel, you can bring in different colors into the dials. But gem setting gives you this extraordinary panoply of opportunities to play with. And again, I think the gender split around wearing decorated watches is changing considerably. And I think it will change again now that brands are actively and publicly announcing they're working in lab-grown diamonds. Tag Heuer announced a fully set lab-grown diamond watch this year. And that's suddenly
very much the speak of the fair, actually.
It really was. And I think there was lots of interesting pieces at the fair, but the fact that this was coming from Tag Heuer in the first instance, which is a brand based on innovation and technical achievements, but they're focusing on the actual diamond setting of that watch. And it fundamentally stabilizes supply when you know that those diamonds are being grown. So you can calculate how many watches you can make. You can calculate how much they're going to cost you to make, because you know all of the elements are preordained in a sense, because you're creating them from scratch. no pun intended. So this is going to change again. How I was watching on the stand how many people came up to view the watch, because it was extraordinary to see. But I mean, it was completely gender blurred. I mean, men were as interested in that piece as women, for obvious reasons. So I think gem setting is becoming another, I wouldn't say tool in the toolbox, but it was something that was held by the manufacturers, frankly. Probably the top 3 or 4 brands had access to, or they had the individuals concerned who could enamel, who could gem set. Now this is an operation that it's passing out into the wider watch world, and that's giving you far more choice. And you mentioned the rainbow, of course, but you can all think of a very, very celebrated rainbow bezeled timepiece, limited by the ability to get hold of the stones that blend in the rainbow colour as perfectly as possible. I mean, I'm not a jeweller. I wouldn't be able to tell you the difference between one or the next, but those who can will tell you that the execution is where the value lies. But because they're so limited in their executions, it means that they will become and are becoming highly desirable watches in their own right. And it's not something that you would expect from something that is effectively a decorated watch.
Well, that's the point. The collar, if in terms of whether it's a diamond set, whether it's sapphires, diamonds, or in this case that we're talking about, sort of more rainbows, or any setting, I suppose, it just shows off the artistry, creative skill, and the workmanship that we are used to talking about from the inside out. Other than enamel dialing, which we talk a lot about in terms of how the work that goes into it. And it really does show off the full sort of grandiose potential of the brands and what they're capable of. And they also make they'll be piece uniques, because they can never be exactly the same. Whilst brands actually don't talk about them unless it's a limited edition, ultimately they can't be the natural stones. But I think the lab grown element, I think it's going to change the game completely. Longer term, I don't think we'll see too much of it immediately. You and I won't turn up in Switzerland next year, providing I'm invited, and suddenly everything is going to be lab grown. But it was very clever, and I liked how TAG launched it in a big way. It wasn't here's a subtle watch. They went tourbillon. They went, the crown itself was a diamond. The everything it was. Grown into the case or the case, so they were very clever with that, and it just that level of innovation coupled with something that is considered so the element of a diamond is it's so romantic, and it's so personal as well. So whether it's sort of a Vacheron that we've got here, and Jaeger play very well and work very well with diamond setting and snow setting. I've been lucky enough to see the manufacture and the work that goes into it. It's not a watchmaker that necessarily needs to do that. It's a jeweler.
It's an entirely separate discipline.
Craft,
and thank you for reminding me to bring up the fact that these are handmade products, and I think that's where you can enshrine that level of handwork, is to say this is the setting that is done by our in-house team of setters, or we work very closely with the company that's set. And in some respects, you can look at a watch brand rather like a hotel. There are 3-star hotels will offer you lovely service and a great stay and a good night's sleep. Or there's 5-star hotels will have a spa en suite. They'll have personal butlers. They will have a car outside that will run you short errands. So the highest in what brands in watchmaking are the 5-star, 6-star. I believe there's even a 7-star hotel somewhere in the world right now. But what I'm saying is they have all of these qualities, they have all of these competencies under their own roof, and that's what they're bringing to market when they do specific gem setting. It's interesting you say about lab-grown diamonds. It brings us back rather to bimetal, because I think, again, I don't know if the jury's out on lab-grown diamonds. I know people have a lot of interest in to know, well, what constitutes a real diamond then? Is it something that is actively dug out of the earth, or is it something that's created by chemical fusion in the same way that diamond that was created millions of years ago was created? So there does seem to be an interesting moment where there will be clearly a steady market for lab-grown diamonds for all the reasons we can establish, but it's how do the brands work with it. And I think to your point about Tag Heuer putting it center stage at their stand in Watches and Wonders this year, normally that might have been something that would have been behind a velvet curtain, and you'd be introduced, allowed to come in and maybe have a look. Gentle, subtle, very Swiss, and again, but no, it's bang there. So I think as much as we love to talk about models, we talk about brands, but we love to talk about their models fundamentally. We love to talk about the movements. We love to talk about complications. We love to talk about all of the things that make watchmaking so sublime: accuracy, robustness, reliability being one of the core attributes of a mechanical watch, even more so than a smartwatch where you find yourself charging it every 3 hours. But fundamentally these things are built to last. But to add materials into that conversation is really interesting, because then you really are talking about the intrinsic qualities, the intrinsic abilities of each of these companies to bring real difference to their watches and to create real individual pieces that reflect quite clearly the individual taste of the wearers. And there's so much choice now than there ever has been. And it's remarkable to see certain attributes, which was perhaps a switch out of a dial colour, which would be met with extraordinary sort of discussion a few years ago. Now no one even blinks. Oris are doing incredible work, particularly in dials. Oris do wonderful bronze watches. That no one even blinks now when a brand comes to market with a really entertaining, exciting colorway. And that's because we've been allowed and we've learned to accept and to understand that materials now are as important to the watch itself as who made it, where it was made, and how it was made.
Okay, potentially a controversial question, going back to the lab-grown diamonds. Do you think it's the lethality of gem setting as we go forward?
Well, because you can grow them to tolerances to such a degree that you can basically design the watch and grow the diamond, whereas before you had to find the diamond and then work out how you were going to integrate it into the watch, or perhaps design the watch around the diamonds that you'd found. There's clearly going to be an absolute game change in the way decorating watches is going to go. It's going to open up the availability of diamond set watches to a much broader market. Will that affect the market in should we say earthworked diamonds? I can't see that happening. I think there'll be a displacement, as we see in watchmaking itself, between high manufacturers and high complications and others. But it is fundamentally going to change how we approach and how we look at the watches that we wear, because we'll be quite comfortable wearing watches.
People will be craving a flawed diamond. It means it's real.
Well, so, unfortunately, it's not my area of expertise, but I'm sure in time you'll be able to grow flaws into diamonds if we can't already. So there will be a yellow. No, I'm joking for effect. But I think to the point, this point about the next developments is an interesting one, because even in composites, even in the materials we've already talked about, these are now changing again, because there is a requirement to reflect an ecological remit around watchmaking. Obviously, as we know, they are one of the most sustainable objects on Earth. They last multiple generations. And they are, from dust to dust, probably one of the most sustainable products in the luxury sector, however, if not the most sustainable. But now we're already seeing how recycled steel at Panerai, for instance, is coming to market, how most brands now are looking at how they produce their straps, particularly if they're including synthetics. So there's a recycling and an upcycling story that's now coming into the material side of the business. And then here we have the technical developments around lab-grown diamonds, for instance, and these are fundamentally changing again the materials with which the brands are playing, and that's going to be a massive leap, I think.